Hi, everybody. Welcome to 1320 Main Studios. This is brought to you by Occupy Venice, and this is the first of a series that we're doing called Venice Talk. And tonight we're going to have filmmaker Peter Joseph here. We're very excited. He has made 3 award-winning documentaries, and most of us have seen them. I want to thank, just a couple thank yous before we start, to Jason Lord and Jen Wilding, who are the coordinators of the Zeitgeist Movement, to 1320 Main Street for hosting us tonight, so thank you. We are live stream here in Venice, California, to Alex Mahone for running the camera. And of course to Occupy Venice and everybody that came tonight to hear the talk. And shout out to all the other Occupies around the world. So I'm going to bring up Jason Lord, Peter Joseph, Jen Wilding. You can come up? All right,
great. Okay, we got the comfy chair coming forward. Will that work? That'll work. Yes, sure. Yeah, I think. Stand to, or you want me? I'll bring the mic over. All right, we're sitting. Come over this way. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Lord. I got involved with the Zeitgeist Movement a couple of years ago, basically from seeing the movies, and I was inspired so much by the work of the film and what it talked about, what it advocates as far as a sustainable direction. I volunteered to help coordinate a California chapter, which is now 18 cities in California have similar chapters, which are groups designed similar to what yours is for Occupy Venice. So I was sort of the point person that brought in the website and bring everyone together. So anyway, we have a global movement. It's about 2 years of age. We've gone through a lot of similar growing pains. I actually sympathize and empathize with Occupy Venice for a lot of the struggles you guys have getting organized and getting off the ground. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's mainly just set up for the evening. I think, did you have something you wanted to say first? Or, I'm just curious, how many people have seen any of the Zeitgeist documentaries, any of the 3 films? That's everybody, okay. We did a screening for Occupy Venice last month, I think, of Addendum. There's another film waiting in the wings after that, which is a little longer and a little more into details about the solution aspect, which is called Moving Forward. So you can see all these films online if you haven't seen them already, zeitgeistmovie.com. But we'll hopefully get to do, you guys have Sunday evening documentary screenings. We'll fit Moving Forward into the rotation at some point. So anyway, thanks. I hope you have questions. If you've seen the films and you're wondering about how this resource-based economic model could ever come into being, how we deal with the political system, how we deal with power structures, how do you deal with capitalism, with the corporate concentration of wealth and the corruption that goes on in the world, have these questions on your mind, fire them at us, and we'll answer them as best we can. There's a very simple logic to being in balance with the environment and seeing the impact of the environment on human behavior. And when we start looking at the problems that we see is just the way it is all the time, you know, pollution increases, corruption in politics. I mean, there's a long list of statistics that we all identify with as problems. We start to see that these things are produced by the system the way it's designed. The monetary, economic, socioeconomic system, the way we have it set up, the way we live in it, produces the corruption that you see. It's actually systemic. So if we ever want to have a world where this stuff doesn't exist, or at least the probabilities drop, we're going to have to evolve out of the socioeconomic system that we're in. And there's a bit of a process to that. First, it starts with understanding and changing your point of view on what the problems are, the root cause, what's causing these outcomes. And then, once you see that, we can move forward to a logical, but very simple train of thought on how we could actually organize society and have everyone thrive, have health care, have the mundane jobs disintegrated, just drop away, you know, apply science, apply automation, create an access abundance for the world's people. And this model that we talk about is global. It includes everybody. There's no stratification. There's no person left behind. So Anyway, so just set that up in your minds and think of some questions for us, and we'll, thanks for being here. So Kim, did you want to fire away first? Okay, I think this mic is off right now. So I'm going to bring this over here. We can center ourselves.
You guys could pull in, more towards the middle. That would be great. So just to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to for you guys. I mean, you guys have been around a lot, the Occupy movement, but so in support of Occupy Wall Street and the social issues it addresses, in the past 2 months, Occupy Venice has we've had an art event, we hosted movie screenings, we screened Addendum, we've had a music event, a poetry event. Some of us have helped set up the stages downtown and the performances at Occupy LA. We've participated and organized a march. A large group of Occupy Venice participants were at the raid of City Hall. I'm sure a lot of people here were there. And many of us are showing up at city council meetings and other political events. Most of us have seen your films. Some of us have followed the Zeitgeist Movement. And a lot of us were there for your speech at Occupy LA after the march through the financial district. And we all took in that speech. It was great, so thank you. So I'm going to get to my question. So my question is, now that most of the tent occupations are down and people have reorganized like Occupy Venice, in your opinion, what would be the next best step for Occupy Venice and the other Occupy movements? How do we most effectively move forward now that we have a local and global group of supporters and there's this huge wave of momentum? Everybody's communicating around the world via Facebook, and it's really amazing. So we're at this critical point of reorganizing, and just in your opinion, what do you suggest would be next? You guys have years of experience.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. What's next for Occupy? I guess until someone starts to advocate a new system or some very legitimate and long-lasting and scrutinizable number of changes that will help some type of resolution occur with all of the problems that are listed and the grievances of Occupy across the world, I'm not quite sure what the next step is. Because if you look at what's happened with Occupy, it's been flattened out as far as the symbol of it, which is the tents and everything else that have occurred. And New York, we all knew wasn't going to last very long. They were working on that one. And LA was very cordially flattened out. And of course, now Occupy more or less exists in the state of mind, if you will. It's, there's not really an occupation, as it were. And that's equally as viable to me. The question is, what do you do? And I think if there's anything that we walk away with here, it's what is the solution? Because if you propose a solution that can be analyzed and logically deduced and then hence understood, and then therefore that train of thought can hopefully overcome the filters that people have that try to maintain this system because they identify with it, slowly that begins to permeate, and then Occupy becomes something different. And hopefully it'll be more of a transformation of the Occupy movement into something that actually proposes solutions. And that's why the Zeitgeist Movement is what it is. I mean, a lot of people like to compare the two movements. The Zeitgeist Movement's defining feature isn't as much of a complaint or as an activist group. It is the fact that we push forward with a very straightforward train of thought about what it means to live on the planet. And if you've seen Zeitgeist Addendum or Zeitgeist Moving Forward, there's a great linear treatment on a lot of those issues. If anyone has other questions regarding that, I'm happy to address that, but that's a long-winded subject I'm not going to jump into right now as far as what defines that. So to answer the question, there has to be some type of project, as far as I'm concerned, a global project basically for redesign that takes all of the frustrations, puts them into utility, and brings people that have the fortitude and education and skill set to basically, in my opinion, push forward with a completely new social system. And that's another huge conversation. I made a little blog thing where I said a parallel government should be created. What I meant by that isn't that you get a bunch of people sitting around and say how they're going to control people like government is today and making laws and all of that stuff. It has to do with what is a legitimate basis, a sustainable basis for society that respects the planet, respects the habitat, and also has the most optimized treatment of public health possible. And that's a completely technical orientation. It doesn't take Republicans or Democrats or liberals to think that way. It's a completely scientific train of thought. So the parallel government, if you will, is really a group of people that are willing to or already have education on the issues that really relate to the foundational operation of society. And what is that? That's resource management. That's what is labor? What defines labor? Is labor really people, selling gum at an airport because they need a paycheck? Is that really the appropriate use of the human mind, which has an immense infinite capacity? We dumb people down. Again, I'm not going to go through the tangent of it, but what defines the most progressive state of affairs based on knowledge we have today in the scientific revolution that we've had since 3,000 years ago? We've had, maybe it's the beginning of the real scientific revolution. It's gone ebbed and flowed to the Middle Ages. And suddenly now society is beginning to realize it has to be scientific. It can't be political anymore. It can't be superstitious anymore. Our survival is in balance based on how rational we apply the knowledge that we've accumulated through our evolution. And there's the real danger. And if we don't do something, all the destabilization that you have now is just going to get worse. And there's plenty of statistics to denote that every element of life support is in decline. All the destabilization, which is unprecedented on a global scale, can only get worse if you look at where the debt crisis is, the unemployment crisis, and all the things that are weeding themselves out naturally because of the state of evolution of technology and everything else. I'm planting seeds here, by the way, for other questions. So I'm trying to work on some kind of way to explain how a new institution, a global institution, can come together. I had an idea. It was called the Global Redesign Institute. And of course, this builds upon other researchers. I strongly suggest everyone research Buckminster Fuller and Jacques Fresco and many other thinkers that have thought about what a new societal design may be and really latch onto that train of thought. There is no utopian vision, though. There's nothing that you can just say, here it is, and that's it. There's no structural implementation. Technology moves too fast. So anyone that shows you something that says, this is it, they're wrong. It can't be, because by the time that even comes to fruition, considering where we are now, it's going to be long outdated, because the technological revolution that defines our values will continue regardless. So the Global Redesign Institute is something I put forward. It doesn't have to be that, but it's about how do you get people together to redesign society, legitimately create a real economy. What's a real economy? It's the proper management of the Earth's resources and the proper management of public health. And you put those two elements together and you get a self-referring type of logic that comes from the ground up that basically dictates what our values should be if we expect to live in harmony and balance and not have wars and disease and famines and all the destabilizing elements we have now. So to summarize that, some type of organization needs to emerge. I think Occupy is a great stemming point for this, just like many other movements out there like ours. And it has to come together where people say, you know what, we're not going to play the political game anymore. We're going to show the world what a real design of a society may be. And then if people see the merit of it, then the public slowly is educated, and then eventually a new counter-revolution emerges that's not violent, it's not protest. It will basically shift where it stops supporting the existing system and begins to support this other sustainable system. And the whole thing just falls over. As poetic as that sounds, it's not. Can't put that in any other phrase because I have no idea how it really would happen. Yeah. But that's the way I think this type of thing will work. I've given up on political things. I don't think the political lobbying, and I think there are plenty of intelligent people that could be turned around in the political institution, but the game is faulty. The political game is not about actual proper social management in the way that it really needs to be to define an economy. Of course, it's a gangland thing. It's a mafia thing. It's an echo of tribal mentalities. And that's unfortunately where the planet is at large with sovereignty and everything else. So I think I've planted many seeds there. And if anybody else wants to say something about that, we can move on. What? There we go.
Oh, I'm fine to respond as the questions.
Oh, okay, fine. Kim, I believe you had a list to start off with. Because we're webcasting tonight, we'll ask you to come up to the microphone. Otherwise, the people watching the video online can't hear you. So we'd like to get your questions recorded. So if you want to ask a question, just come up to this microphone right here and fire away.
First of all, thank you. You talk about our economic game of differential advantage. Mm-hmm. How have you personally changed this in your life?
As far as how I don't participate in differential advantage, personally?
How you personally?
Well, the first thing to point out is that differential advantage isn't something that you really choose in this system. You either work the game that's been set up and survive fiscally, meaning you have a job and you pursue it, and you are basically in competition to the organization you work with, the corporation, or you're in competition with other laborers that want your job. Differential advantage takes many different forms, and I always want to point that out. In order for any of us to survive, we all have to engage in that type of semi-corrupt social behavior. That's just the kind of social Darwinism that's been set up. That's just the way it is. I mean, for example, but to answer your question, I would say that one thing I've done is I've not made my films scarce. So my films are available for free and downloadable for free. So I do have a semi-commercial aspect to being a filmmaker. I have to generate income to make more films. That's just the way the system is. But I also don't take a full-on commercial route, and I give it away for free, which is a very difficult line to walk if I want to support myself. That's about the closest thing I could think of. I mean, I certainly don't behave, and I think many of us don't behave in ways we would consider to be overtly greedy, as it were. But it's all an issue of degree when you look at, say, the, quote, 1%. Who are these people? These are the best game players, the best people that strategize with differential advantage. They know what they're doing, and they think it's good. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they think it's good to have billions and billions of dollars while a billion people are starving? Why wouldn't they think that? Because that's everything the system has ever taught them as far as what defines their value and self-worth and status and success. So,
but basically, I mean, you're talking about radical mind changing, right? I mean, really about kind of dewiring the way that we're all participating in that game. So I guess, to further that question, how do you...
You remove the game. You remove the game itself. If you realize we're causal organisms, and as controversial as that is, people don't like to think of themselves as being that influenced by others. They don't like to assume. They like to think there's this heavy free will thing and that they're making their own decisions, but we're really not making our own decisions per se. We have a small threshold of free will, as it's called. Every word I'm saying has been taught to me, all the values that we all share historically, traditionally. Our political affiliations are all groomed and we're shaped and molded through our lives. So the financial system as it exists, because I used to be a trader. I used to be of the greediest mentality. I wanted to escape from this system. It wasn't that bad, but I wanted to get away, and the only thing I could think of was that. And my focus for many years was how to gain the most differential advantage in every situation I could get, because that's what I was taught. And that was what the environment required from me. I didn't have a moral aptitude for that. All that was irrelevant. It didn't mean anything. And it doesn't mean anything to most people when your survival is contingent upon that game and when everything seems to support and reward that behavior. So to be corrupt is normal in this system. That's really the way it is. It's an anti-social system. We live in a pseudo-social system. So my point, though, is that the environment is corrupting all of us. And if you want to change human behavior, yes, it's going to take an introspective thing for especially now, obviously, to see how many people are suffering, all the things that's going on in the world, the horrors that really are a consequence of this system, to have that empathy, and then to realize that, yes, you might be able to change yourself to a certain degree, but you're still playing the same game that you've always played. So every time you walk into a store, every time you work for a corporation, every time you seek and you gain employment over someone else who's applying for that job, you are engaging in an antisocial behavior, which is basically the root stem that leads to all the other non-empathetic behaviors you see in the world. So, until the system changes, not that much can be said. There's the paradox, though, the chicken and the egg thing. Who changes first, the consciousness of the people or the environment that produces them? Obviously, it's going to be a combination of the two. But I firmly believe in the symbiosis. There's no way you can deny it. And if you want to raise kids, I'll give you this example just to throw it off the cuff, which makes the point, but it's also on another subject. People say, hoarding and greed, that's a natural human tendency. People love to think that way. They like to think that people will just behave these ways regardless. So if you had, say, a grocery store, and everyone could go into the grocery store and get whatever they needed for free. It was just there. The vision is that someone runs in there and grabs everything and runs out for some strange reason. But that's just what this culture has groomed. But if you think about it, if you go into a grocery store now and say a mother comes in with her kid, and the kid grabs something, and it's talking about in present day, and puts it in its pocket, and the mother would grab it and say, no stealing. It's a value thing. You're not supposed to steal, right? And the kid grows up learning that that's not appropriate. They don't even learn that it's against the law first. They just learn it's not right. And the values that the parents implant are there. So you can take that same value manipulation that happens, that conditioning that occurs through parents, you can apply that to, say, a social system that isn't based on money, where a kid goes in the store and starts taking stuff, and the mother says, no, you don't do that in this system. And it's just as easily as you can condition them not to steal, you begin to condition and groom them not to take advantage of their environment of excess, to how unsustainable excess is, how it's amoral, if you want to give it that term, to want so much more for yourself and less for others. You see what I mean? So all the values could really be easily shifted if the approach was really there in the educational system and in, of course, what's rewarding us in the environment. So the balance between our consciousness now versus how we're produced is the ultimate transitional question. And that's where I rack my brain at all times. That's why the educational thing is so hard. You know, you got to get people to change. You got to tell people they're wrong in everything they hold dear, and that doesn't fly very well sometimes, unfortunately. But if you sit them down long enough, they'll eventually get the logic, because eventually everyone gets turned around. And I'll say this in conclusion: with the breakdown of society, everyone is going to be turned around eventually, because the merit of these old values only serve a smaller and smaller number of people. And then eventually there's going to be a sort of an empathetic revolution where even the multi-billionaires are going to start to think, why is everyone in this horrible state, most everyone, and why am I so rewarded? And I think something will trigger, because it's not sustainable for them either. The next stage is violence, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that anyone's going to trigger that. We're going to trigger that. No. Violence and destabilization go hand in hand, and that's my biggest fear. And that's why you have all these billionaires trying to just go in and help. I really believe the fear of the millionaires and billionaires that, whatever the organization that was developed recently, they're afraid because they see the destabilization. They fear for themselves because what's going to happen? We already have protests against banks, protests against corporations. What happens when they show up on their mansion's front lawn? That's just around the corner. So one way or another, the system will self-correct. The question is how. Will it be smart and intelligent and move cleanly and transitionally, or will it blow up? And that's, I think, the greatest fear we all have, is it blowing up and turning probably for the worse for a long period of time. I think we're all more or less just scared. Frankly, that's pretty much why I'm here. I'm like, you just look at what's possible historically, and then you look at what's on the horizon, at least in my analysis and what the movement does, and obviously what Occupy recognizes. And you begin to see that Occupy should not slow down. No movement that's seeking change should slow down, because what's on the horizon could just be that much worse for everyone if some kind of really strong educational awareness action isn't taken. And eventually I think it will evolve into non-conforming processes, Martin Luther King style things where you're not giving in to certain systems, such as getting a hold of unions and getting the unions to stop for particular periods and showing corporations certain control, and then having certain demands that echo the new social system. I could ramble on about transitional elements of how you could socialize, for lack of a better expression, society that would move slowly, step by step, from this system to a new system based on abundance and resource management and proper distribution of labor, and actually taking care and producing good public health. And if someone has that question, I can expand on that to some degree, but I think I answered your question before.
Can I ask one more question? Is that okay? You've taken on a lot of agendas under one roof, and I'm curious if that's been, if you feel at this point if that's been a detriment in terms of the conversation, and
I mean, for me?
About that. Well, the project and the nature of the film and all that you're discussing is many agendas, so.
It's more simple in my mind. It's one big evolution where it's traditional assumptions clashing against an emergent reality. You have all of these people holding on to their identities and everything they've been taught, and the really fearful need that they want to believe everything they know is right, and that's it. It's final. The old cliche of the stubborn old man. He just doesn't want to learn anymore. He's just locked in. That's how society is. It just keeps evolving and trying to lock itself into fixed states. And it's just not going to work that way. There's too many powerful things. So to me, it's just one big battle, whether it's religion, whether it's philosophy, whether it's economics. It's this failure to recognize the impending change that's right behind you all the time, and that you can't have any emotional attachment to what's happening now at all if you expect to be fluid in your evolution. And of course, that's counter to most of human reactions, unfortunately. We're still at that kind of baggage of evolution where we baggage of evolution where we want to have an emotional identification with everything when really, and that's why we advocate computer technology for management of resources, because it loses that, what on one side a beautiful thing, the emotional element's beautiful, wonderful, defines a human being. When it comes to management, it really gets in the way of what we're doing when it comes to our sense of self-preservation and our fear impulses and the fight or flight, the lower reptilian stuff we have, that dominated us for so many centuries before the cerebral cortex pulled out. We have brains that can think, but we tend to be hyper emotional still, especially when you challenge people's beliefs, especially when it comes to the economic system, which is the greatest religion of all time. So, I hope that makes sense.
Oh, Jen had something.
I just wanted to add, when you were mentioning that you thought it was many agendas, I guess the way that I look at it as if we could pick an agenda that addresses as many problems as possible, which one would it be? And to me, that's what the Zeitgeist Movement is doing, because it's one root cause. It's really getting to it. It's first understanding that all of the problems that we're talking about are essentially technical, getting that understanding. All of the problems that we're talking about are essentially global, if you really think about it, that we're all connected, that you can only run and hide for so long before it will come and get you. We've realized that our environment, we're all connected. Even economically, we're connected. We're sharing the planet. It's technical. It's global. We need it to be sustainable. So it's about, can we take what we know, intelligent information, which we have the science and technology right now to do this, and decide on a system that addresses that. We just need to do it in a big way. And if we were to take that approach, then we would solve most of the problems that we discuss at events like Occupy, which is why, to me, that's the Zeitgeist Movement, or movements for getting off the monetary system, a resource-based economic model, is putting your eggs in the right basket, because it does affect so many things. I guess that's the way that I look at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you have your hand up? Did you have a question? Yeah, it is. You did. Sure. Fire away.
I, for one, would love to hear you ramble on about transitional elements. I hear about and read about Jacques Fresco, and I love his and your holistic approach to transforming reality into something that's more sustainable and works for more people. On the other hand, I work for coastal advocacy and water quality nonprofits, and a bunch of my friends are working for reduction of plastics in the ocean and water quality, and at the same time traveling around to see people to talk about it have giant carbon footprints, right? Sure. So I guess my question is basically, if it's going to be incremental, if the consciousness and the logistics are going to have to transform sort of at the same time, or swing back and forth, right, what are the next steps to changing the system?
Well, again, it's subjective, and it depends on where we are at a certain point. If we were to start from now, the observation of automation and its power to produce an abundance, the observation of where science is and the amazing efficiency, not just for automation, but just approaches to how we can revolutionize, and the amount of efficiency that's not being utilized now, which is the beauty of the people like Jacques Fresco and Buckminster Fuller, is they recognize this, and they see that if we could just reduce the waste that's inherent in this system from many different angles of the market system to the way it's orchestrated through cost efficiency and all of this stuff and planned obsolescence. I won't go down the big list on that one. But I will say that the inefficiency is so vast that first you have to recognize the efficiency that's possible, and then you have to get a concerted effort to apply that. And I would say the first thing you do is you begin to make free certain things where the most efficient applications exist. So we know we can have vertical farms that can produce an immense amount of food with very low nutrient requirements, organically produced, aeroponics and hydroponics, very low water requirements. You can connect them to desalinization. Your mind can run with what's possible to basically create free food with very little human interaction with the farming mechanisms that are there. I mean, of course, most agriculture is automated anyway today, even the non-advanced kind. So what if you had that scenario where suddenly everyone in Los Angeles had access to all the life-supporting food that they wanted? It might not be caviar, but we're talking about a very powerful state that sort of drops all the market share on that level. So then you have energy. I'll allude to this as I go, if I can explain this correctly. Then you have energy as another example. Energy, right now we're living off of deposits in the planet, a very arcane, old, outdated idea. We're surrounded by energy forces that can be harnessed from wind to solar, to the geothermal, the heat that's built in the energy. I'm sure if you guys saw the film, you know all of that stuff. And that can be utilized very efficiently as well with advanced technology, and that would enable all energy to be free, easily. There's many other ways to transport electricity. You don't need the cumbersome utility lines that we do now. So let's just assume that you have free food and free energy, which is technically feasible right now, okay? That would reduce market share by a massive percentage. In other words, the GDP of whatever regions are doing this would drop substantially. So what does that do? It creates an offset. And the more you automate, the more it offsets the destruction of market share. And that will enable a gravity to move one way or the other. Either it fights the automation and the free resources, or it moves to want to push forward with full automation, full making free of resources. So you have a natural evolution if you approach it that way in a step-by-step manner, which could easily be done if you had the permission of government and corporations to do that. But that would be called socialism in this context. You can't possibly have anything, subsidized in that level to provide for people. That's apparently the Antichrist, in the system. That's what it's amazing to me when I see these political people go on and they're so against anything that's even remotely social, even remotely caring, and then they get applause from the audience. Like the brainwashing is mind-blowing. So you could have a step-by-step process like that where you apply the technology, it becomes free, it destroys the market share, reduces GDP. Suddenly everything else has to shift. The labor system has to shift. What you do then is you cut the hours in half. Everyone works half a day. The other people pick up the slack. You have a very systematic way of distributing labor, income. You just statistically figure out what's required based on whatever the price value is or whatever is left to be paid for. And slowly the same process continues. And when you think about all the jobs that have no utility, such as, say, you walk into an airport, as I mentioned earlier, and you have a cashier, all she does is ring up gum every 5 minutes. You could put a big front on that thing and automate the entire thing. There's nothing, if you walk to an airport, it's a classic example of full automation, right? There's nothing that couldn't be automated on the front. You used to have a big, I was going to put this in Zeitgeist Moving Forward. I was an animation I wanted to do. It was just someone walking through an airport. All it was the front of massive vending machines, because it really could be that way. And not crude either. We're talking about very sophisticated. It's already, the tipping point of that has already been there for a while. You see these vending machines. You go into a Subway restaurant, and you're like, what are they doing? They're in a conveyor line. You can automate that in 5 seconds. It's just waste of life. So that rationale comes in there too. So you start to think about labor not as something that everyone has to have, but you think about it and what's actually applicable, what's the best use for people. And if you really groom people, I think people say they say, oh, that person's just low IQ, they're just dumb, because they're dim-witted because they've been sitting there for 10 years ringing a cash register. Their brains have been wired to do just that. It's a horrible thing. The human potential is tremendous. Even those that you consider to be impaired or whatever, there's still tremendous potential and originality, even in the most autistic individuals. It's just a matter of harnessing those issues. Sure. I mean, I could ramble on and on still, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess I totally buy into that. If a machine comes along that can make 100 people's worth of work doable by 10 people, then everybody should just work 10% as much, or
until it's phased out,
or maybe 12% as much, and the guy with the machine makes more money at the same time, right?
Right.
But the question is, how do you make that palatable politically in our current context, right? The guy who starts the vertical farming is, in our current economic context, going to want to make an assload of money, right?
Well,
and
therein lies the subsidization issue, though. What has to happen is a new level of what people condemn as socialism, where you don't even have to call it subsidization. It's just getting the access to the resources required. So you conscript, is the right word? to conscript? Yes. You conscript is a nice way of saying taking. You get the state to authorize conscription, which is, again, a huge no-no in the capitalist world. But it's required where instead of using money, it doesn't mean you're just taking people's resources and property. These resources need to be nationalized for the purpose of producing this issue, and that's that because it's going to benefit for everybody, and we're not going to have profitability in that area. Now, these have failed historically because all the systems that attempted to do that were extremely inefficient, and they were fighting the monetary system the entire time. The closest thing we had, of course, was the Bolshevik Revolution, which if you actually talk to people, and this isn't to compare the two, by the way, as far as what was traditionally known as communism, but if you actually went back and looked at the people that were involved in that revolution, you'd be amazed at how enlightened the people that what they believed in were before it became corrupted, before the world turned against them, and it turned into a completely different social approach with a dictatorial approach, unfortunately, because they were fighting. There's far too much risk. It was too premature. It wasn't ready yet. In fact, that was the best comment I heard from a 90-year-old woman in the 1980s that was in the Bolshevik Revolution. She said, when this all happened, I just realized that human society was not ready yet. It was the smartest thing I'd ever heard because she was absolutely right. But because that was before the age of technology, there was more of a moral relativism as far as human class association. So this is a different paradigm today. So to answer your question, no, you couldn't do it in the monetary system exactly like that. There would have to be some level of, quote, government intervention to get it done, or a constituency of other people that stand beside the government that have so much money that they're able to actually do it themselves with this in their intention. Now, that's going to be a hard one to find, too. We have a lot of billionaires out there, but how many of them are really doing anything remotely social? They set up their little nonprofit foundations, which are tax havens. They throw a couple million here and there, which is a vast, tiny percentage of whatever their company's worth is, and they get their little credits to make it seem like they're altruistic and humanitarian. So that's part of the difficulty of it. But it could be done. I could write a whole treatment. I intend to write a transition plan with two different things. One is the approach of a step-by-step, and the other is approach of basically how to get people together to, well, I hate to say it, but basically the grassroots revolution, if you will, where the participation in the current system becomes null and void, and it's more of an overthrow, but nothing like an overthrow you would hear, from in a traditional context. In other words, I don't believe the government would ever do what I just described. I think they'll do a little bit because they'll be so in fear of the rich people will be so in fear that they'll be willing to subsidize certain things just enough to create just enough stability, but I just don't think that's going to last because of the other failures of the system that are on the horizon.
So in the incremental approach, is there a way that we can get people to stop voting against their own interests?
Education. Well, you say voting in the sense of...
Well, I mean, assuming that the transition is going to take place at least part of the way with our current form of, like, quote-unquote democracy, I feel like there are tons of people who are voting in their own social and economic, not in their own social and economic best interests in our country.
Nobody is participating in their own best interest. Right. I gotta let Jason talk about that too, but I'll just say real fast that the ultimate paradox of this system is that everyone is doing everything for the short term. Mm-hmm. It's a short-sighted perspective. The profit and survival is so short-winded that getting people to see the broad view. When you have Japanese nuclear power plants that were built with financial deficiencies that slowly they were not designed properly to withstand the earthquake, and now you still have fallout and all these atrocious things that you don't hear about in the media. No one's immune to that. Doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't build something to protect you from all the radiation that's coming in. No one's immune to nuclear winter if we ever reach that point of nuclear war. No one's immune to the real global problems that the system has been perpetuating and creating. And I think that's the ultimate realization, that the symbiosis is overpowering. So,
sure. As far as this voting against your own self-interest, if you mean it in I see it as the political context is a limited context to see that concept in. Every time you buy something because it's cheaper, you're voting against your own self-interest. Just by the mere use of a monetary system, you're decoupled from what it took to get that, whatever it was you bought, to you. And, in the broad view, there's like a average 75% resource waste for you to have whatever it is you took at this microphone, for example.
Or globalization, which exploits slave labor for
so
many different things.
The system reinforces, right, the multiplicity with all the different phones and all the crap that it's going to go into a landfill, and the rare earth elements that took millions of years to form that are in there, that will be junked as valueless when the faster one comes out. I mean, it's crazy, and so we, without even thinking about it, are constantly participating in against our own self-interest, because that's what the system requires us to do. So outside of the voting for a dictator for 4 years, once every 4 years, there's really not a lot of participation as far as that goes. I mean, this comes up all the time. Did you vote for where the roads go? No. Did you vote for the space program? No. Did you vote for the transportation system? Did you vote for where the stores are? Did you vote for anything? No, you don't. And then there's this whole rhetoric around, well, you vote with your dollars. And it's just like, you're only as free as your purchasing power in this system. So those people, it's stratified. There's a mass of people that have no vote. They have no say. So that's complete nonsense to make a statement like that, thinking that there's this level of equality that doesn't exist. So anyway, so when you use that phrase, voting against your own self-interest, you also explain the context in which you mean it in, because the political context, they're not there to represent you. They're there to represent the establishment, to keep things going, to keep things just comfortable enough to avoid unrest, which with the environmental impacts, that mentality will fail eventually. It's ecocide to keep doing what we're doing. So they're not going to be able to keep the comfort level up environmentally, even though they just talk about money sequences and GDP. And then voting against your own self-interest, it's required by the system just to compete, just to pull money out of the money supply so you can have access to things that were probably against your well-being to make in the begin with. Yeah.
And the servicing too. It's a service. It's a service system. The whole system is based on service, not resolution. So whether it's cancer, whether it's your car being broken, the entire thing is based on the necessity of inefficiency. If there's anything that's the absolute antithesis of what an economy should be, which is preservation and, of course, good public health, which is the point of the human relationship, it doesn't want any of that. And that's what makes the conundrum so powerful. Is right now the efficiency is so staggering of what's possible. It's just incredible what we could do. This system would not sustain itself if any of those efficient methods were put forward. And that's really the ultimate evolutionary outgrowth. That's where this system is phasing itself out. It's not. No, it used to be good when everyone used to be a producer in this system. So you'd fish, and I would cut down trees, and that made perfect sense for some kind of barter system and all that stuff. But now it's a completely different revolution of technology and the tools that we establish, and we've just completely transcended everything that's defined the current economy. And back to that point, now everything we do is the antithesis of what good health is. Everything, from top to bottom. You can't escape it until the system's removed.
I just wanted to say that I think that some of what is key is that there's a window of opportunity where there is a collapse, in that a lot of the secret is in the community, and what's going to naturally happen among people who are concerned citizens like yourself that are trying to make it work is very similar to what Occupy as a whole has done. Meaning, right now I know that they're going to foreclosed homes, and so that's a little bit of a mindset that we could tap into, of noticing that the reason why we have homes, and then we have people that need homes, and it's not that we don't have homes to put them in. It's that we don't have a working system. They're not able to work the system in order to have those homes. So it's not a resource issue. And when we start to focus with enough people to realize it's not a resource issue, we can do this with community. You'll start to see, well, here's a lot of resources that nobody can even operate because it's not part of the system, right? But how can we create something from it? How can we take community and take our existing skills and create something from that? And I sort of feel like that's at the heart where things are going to start. It just needs to continue. The important thing is to keep the goal for something that doesn't also become into tribalistic communities, to recognize this is still temporary. We're going to do this until we get enough people together and can start designing a system that's global that carries these same values. But I think that's the secret. And we don't really know all the opportunities that are going to be available to us yet, but I like that Occupy, to me, is really great. It's like when you think about occupying property. You're there, people can see you, and there's a statement in that that we kind of found out, well, yeah, you can't just do that. You can't just do that, but there's a statement in that when enough people set out to do something, you can do it for a little while. So how many more people can you convince to do something, create something, to help become sustainable in small groups, but continue to educate so that it doesn't become still, because that's still a position of scarcity. Use that environment to really get the values in that we need to transition off onto something global and take the skills that we have, because people who are losing their jobs are technicians too. I mean, I knew someone in Illinois who built the computer that replaced him. And that's happening. So you have people with high level of skills that all they need are the resources to create something. Could be high tech even.
Please.
My question is how you sustained the movement during those growing pain stages. Does that make sense? Because there's about half of us who have been here for Occupy Venice from the beginning, and it's definitely been this ebb and flow of personalities and wants and needs, and I might know the answer to this, but I'm curious about your experience and if you have any feedback or wisdom about how you guys sustained the movement through the growing pains.
Wow. There is an ebb and a flow, and there are a lot of people that have splintered off and done their own thing that aren't, like I'm one of the few original core volunteers, basically. You'll find that there's always a small core group that understand the direction and see the necessity for it, and so their actions are just based on that. I guess I've just learned not to manage my expectations, really. I would love for the whole this idea to catch fire worldwide, and then have enough people want to start exercising some new values, basically, to make a transition. But as far as how to do it, I don't know. I would say one thing is to keep, when you're dealing with volunteers, you have to keep in mind of the resources you have available. When I say resources, I mean like also skills, technical skills, like someone who can operate the camera for the webcast. He's a resource. Someone who's got the space, that's a resource. And you're always meeting people. There's probably all sorts of resources here. If you were to poll everybody in just the Occupy Venice group, you guys can accomplish a lot. But to keep what you're going to do is projects, what you're going to do to engage the public, what you're going to do coordinated-wise, be within the resources you have, and also understand that you guys, it's easy to get sunk by too many ideas. It's easy to have people come in and propose things that exceed the people's time or their skill or just what they're there for. That happens all the time, and one of the things I've had to do in the past is disassociate, and start over. So I'll be surprised if you don't come up against that as a group.
The greatest barrier at this stage is there's a lack of shared values amongst a very angst-filled group of people, whether it's in the Occupy movement or the Zeitgeist movement or any movement that's been any activist group has this issue. And I think 95% of most activist groups, that have been around for a long time, they play the same game they've always played, which doesn't actually have any resolution, which, as an aside, is why I think the Occupy movement is so critical. Any movement that's global in nature, that's recognizing and addressing the system, the financial system as the root cause, to me, is the highest level of awareness and activism that there possibly can be, and sadly most communities are not. But bridging the difference in those communities, which is my point, is a biggest barrier we've had. I've had numerous angry exchanges with people from Greenpeace and lots of things where they really believe that the system is about legislation. They don't get it. They don't get that the foundation of the system is corrupt, therefore the corruption breeds like ants coming out from the refrigerator because there's spoiled food behind it. They just keep killing the ants and they don't realize there's something else going on. So what Jason just pointed out is great too, on that practical level, but on a broad level, every single person that's engaged in any of these movements really has to kind of wear it on their shoulder and really have the courage to show that identification and educate others, and then critical mass will hopefully assess itself. And bridging all the Occupy movements across the world, that was the most wondrous thing to me, is when I was like, okay, Occupy Wall Street, and boom, I was like, there's Europe Occupy, and Latin America. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly what I have been hoping for. And that, I hope, will hold itself up, because that's really the most powerful place you can be, is this unification of humanity. The ultimate catalyst here, and sorry to deviate from your question, is really the critical mass, and find a way to preserve it, maintain it, keep it balanced, keep it sane, and then showing force with the mass at very pivotal, strategic ways, nonviolent, of course, where you just, the end of moving forward was the ultimate gesture of that. I don't know if anyone saw that. The ending is a depiction of this. They go to the financial center, and there's a bunch of police, and there's the cop's looking at the crowd that he sees, doesn't realize that it goes back all the way up the entire island of Manhattan. And at that stage, there's no fight anymore. There's nothing the police can do. There's nothing politicians can do. And I believe that that's really where the gem of this lies, not only from the standpoint of the sort of battle, if you want to call it that, but the unification of humanity, because that's really what's at stake here. You have to get the human society as a whole on the same fundamental page as far as the values of what supports them and creates public health, which I'm sorry to say we are not even remotely close to. That's what makes it so staggering when I think about it more so, is that we're not even remotely close. The entire fiscal system is based on an assumption of human behavior with a complete decoupling of our resources and public health and our scientific vocabulary and ingenuity that we've discovered over the past 3,000 years. And that's the ultimate conundrum. So, sorry to ramble, but I would say that keeping the unification going and trying to bridge differences as well, apart from what Jason said, is really, 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 really important. And hopefully that fundamental train of thought, resource management, what constitutes good public health, ground-up reasoning, will permeate all of them, because there's really, in my view, there's no denying it. I don't know anyone that has ever, I've never had a logical disagreement. Everyone that gets backed into a corner, all they say, it's against human nature. People cannot collaborate, doesn't matter if it's right, you can't have it. They dismiss it based on that premise, and that's the underpinning of every major market theorist on the planet, from Mises to Keynes to the other ones I don't even care to remember. But if you really dig, and I've read all these complex treatments, and it really comes down to that. It's a failed traditional assumption that people really shouldn't attempt to try and get along on a larger scale. And that's the ultimate value shift, the ultimate bridging of the human family. And I think it's about time that happened anyway. So, and our survival basically depends on it in an age of advanced weaponry that can wipe out all of us at a whim.
So speaking to a group wanting to build momentum as a movement, being a part of a movement that has had its own ebb and flow, I sort of feel like I feel your pain because we've been in it for a few years. And what I've come to learn from my experiences is that what has helped the Zeitgeist Movement is that we are behind a very solid set of ideas. So one of the complex things about organizing anything, as I'm sure you've come to learn, is that requires people stepping into roles, taking on responsibilities, and becoming viewed as a leader, and then immediately becoming demonized in some way, or because we don't want any leaders. So how do you work with that? Because there's a need for people to take on responsibilities, and there's a need to also have everyone feel they're contributing. The way that we've done that is that we started out with a solid set of where we're going, a solution that we're holding to. This group is a little bit, you have a common anger and, just discord with what's going on. And that's what's brought the group together, and I think that's why it's huge, because that's huge common ground. And as soon as it's global problems, yeah, we're seeing everybody can relate to this, and they may not even have answers, but they can relate to not having answers. They can relate to this is not what life should be like. There should be something different. I don't know what, but so as soon as you come to a set of solutions, you'll probably start to see division, unfortunately. So I sort of think it's to Occupy's advantage that the common peace element that has been growing is just unrest of we need something different, and to keep that going. As soon as you pick one thing, you're going to have people immediately say, that's not what I would have picked, and step out. And then maybe even argue with you or fight with you, and then you think, wait a minute, I thought we were all in this together and creating a solution. And that's happened even within our movement. But what we've been able to come back to is, but we had this from the start, that this is what we're for. And as long as we educate enough people as to why this is the best idea, and we focus on this, then, that's our strategy. So I would just say that's one thing that has been something that always reorients the group, and that you can't really take it too personally, because it's always either there's personality conflicts over something and you work it out, but if it's something over the main thing that everybody's focused on, you can easily say, no, actually that's something different than this, and wish them well and say, what I always say is, it's not going to happen with one movement, it's going to happen with many movements. So I don't view people who have another bent as being antagonistic, unless they're actively being antagonistic, but that they have a different opinion. I just say, that's great. Let's recognize that your strategy is a different strategy, and allow this group to prop this one up, and just go with that. That's all that I can say. But it is a challenge with the whole leaders thing, I know. Also, another thing that our group recognizes is that you won't hear us talking as much about democracy as a solution. It's almost viewed as a little bit of a limitation. And let me explain. In that, the kind of way that we view the problems we're talking about is that they're technical. So there is a technical solution to, knowing the resources of the planet. How do you feed more people? There would be people who have better answers than if you polled all your neighbors on the street. So we keep the focus on the scientific method for social concern, which really cuts through. You can have a respect for everyone's opinion, but at the end of the day, there's an equation that fits the outcome that we all vote for. So what we're voting for, in the democratic sense, in our movement, I guess I should say, is a shared outcome of we want community, we want a global system, we want technical solutions to be implemented. And when I say that, I hope that you know that I mean they'd be forever improving. It's not the end-all, be-all utopian, all problems solved. There will be new problems, I think, and I would welcome that.
It's about time for some new problems.
Yes. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for some different ones. I mean, this whole war and poverty and all this needs to go. Intellectually, we've moved beyond it. We just need to, as a system, as a people collectively, create something that allows us a better individual experience as well. So I don't want to negate that a lot of people are very passionate about individual expression, but how much more expressive could you be if you had your needs met and a high standard of living, and everyone around you is happy with their standard of living? I mean, as far as content, where else can you go? More and more progress. Different problems, like I said. I don't even know what those are yet. I'm sure there would be. So not totally contented, but as far as, not having the grievances of just basic things, clean water, clean air, food, shelter, health care, there's no reason why people should be denied these things, and I think we can all agree on that. So in that sense, if we can get democratic behind a shared outcome and then seek technical solutions, that's what I think would be the best route to go.
On the leadership thing, because it's hard for me to hear the stories of the people who step up to try to get something done in any movement and then immediately get demonized and cut down for having the courage to show some initiative. And the Los Angeles coordinator for the Zeitgeist Movement said something I stuck in my brain about a month ago. And she's like, leadership isn't a dictatorship where you're just telling people what to do. It's by your actions that others choose to follow and participate. So it's basically, if anyone's done Landmark, it's inspiration. You're inspiring other people. So it's by your actions that others would choose to follow. So that changes the context of this view of a leader from a dictator to making decisions for you, to telling you what to do, to you want to participate because you see the merit in the action. And that would be something that hopefully could help anyone who steps up to initiate something, that they not get demonized and shot down right away just because there's this fear around the word.
Yeah, so. Fear keeps people from stepping up.
Yeah, I mean, if who wants to step up into a hostile environment to initiate
exactly.
something?
So, respect people that step up to take on responsibility.
It also works in the other direction, though, too, because as much as people cry about leadership, many people just want leadership. They don't want to think about things. A lot of people just want to follow somebody. They don't want to learn or educate themselves. The first thing, just real quickly, because I know we want to go into questions, the authority issue, though, is what you're alluding to. We recognize authority all the time. Authority is not a bad thing. When you go to a dentist, you're submitting yourself to an authority. You're not getting a democratic vote from everyone in the lobby to figure out how he's going to fill your tooth. It's you trust them, and there's a reason for that. And I think that's important, and that brings you into the group mind concept, which isn't a fanciful notion. Everyone has certain proclivities and certain educational amalgamations that they accumulate in their life, whether it's through their genes in part and their culture mostly, that enables certain certain advantages over others in certain fields. We all have certain talents and skills that no one else has. It's just the nature of it. And the great failure of awareness is that we're all leaders in that sense, because you really can't have somebody in a position of absolute authority with absolute knowledge. The ultimate farce of leadership is it's someone that knows everything, and that's impossible. Everything that they do is an amalgamation of what everyone else has done since the history of human awareness. So it's one big emergent group mind, and in that context, if you can elevate to that level, you can't even find leaders anymore, because it's just this floating train of thought. It's just this general collective educational flow. There's no sourcing. No one's inventing anything. It's just a free flow. And that's a profound place to be, because it changes your entire view of the way you think about each other, the way you think about the world's problems, because you don't blame anybody anymore. You don't blame the leaders in Washington, because they're just little elements that are popping up over here out of the group mind we're over here. And eventually this spiraling will work, and it will kind of bring, hopefully, everyone on the same page through the biosocial pressures. But I'll stop there.
You had a question? Could you jump up to the mic?
Yeah, just for time, we only have a couple more questions, so if you have a burning question, just please raise your hand. Yep, okay, burning, yep.
I actually had two. First was, what is your opinion of the overpopulation issue? There's a lot of different opinions on the subject, and some people would say it's a pressing issue. Others would say it's sort of an elite agenda. That'd be question one. And question two would be, sort of give me some notion of your timetable for when we might achieve a critical mass, for when this movement and others are creating a solution, versus when the current system might begin to recognize this as a threat and strike back, versus the evolution, versus the environmental issues that are degrading our planet. So, I mean, it's kind of when are we going to achieve a critical mass for all these various forces? That's a very abstract question.
You just walked through the train of thought. I mean, what do we have? We have life-supporting elements in decline on the planet. We have immense social destabilization. We have general declines in public health in general, high increasing cancer rates. There's basically everything that's going wrong is slowly accelerating, and I think it will just be a matter of time before the human lifespan begins its tipping point too. And And that will be the ultimate sign, I think, which has already happened in other regions, just not in the West yet. That basic evolution, degradation of the environment and the social system is one side of it. Then you have the defense mechanism of the system that you point out, which is really the element of the military establishment, which basically are there to support the status quo. And that's something that's hard to predict because it's such an insidious type of thing. But the best defense I would say against that is this very invisible, if you will, critical mass. You know, we talked about leaders just a moment ago. A leaderless movement isn't that people aren't doing things, but no one's a highlight. I continually tell people to stop highlighting me, but I'm in a weird position just because of the film series and how it was founded and everything else. And I really do want to see things happen, but I try my best to get other people to, like if in other regions I get invited to go places, I'm like, listen, if you're in Brazil or wherever, please just do it yourself. I don't want to be seen in this way because that's the big failure of, say, WikiLeaks. You have one figure, Julian Assange. So anything that happens with him suddenly defines WikiLeaks, at least on the surface. It is. You want to get away from all of that, and that's why the leadership issue, everyone needs to step up and take their roles in certain ways where it becomes holographic. You know, the idea of holographic, it's self-contained in all of its component parts. And I think that is the best defense you could possibly have, because if you look at the history of COINTELPRO and CIA and FBI and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, there's an immense history that's really beneficial to learn from when it comes to how they work to address leaders. You probably read about how this PR firm submitted a proposal to a series of corporations to work against Occupy, where they were going to, they pointed out how they were going to discriminately find the leaders and they're going to work to exploit them, to demonize their character. This is public news. Did you hear about that? It was amazing. But it was nothing new. But the best defense is a holographic type of environment. And there's not, I mean, you just can't let a focal point come in. The train of thought has to prevail. And that's the new kind of revolution, if you will. It's really a revolution of education. As far as overpopulation, there's really no actual evidence that that's the case. We're overpopulated in this system. This system can't support everything, obviously. You have 1 billion people starving, 3 billion living on less than $2 a day, if I remember correctly. You have the poverty line in America for 4 at $23,000, which is nuts. I mean, there's many more impoverished than there are that are on the board and stats, just like there are many more unemployed that are on the board in the stats. All of that seems to allude to, oh, there's just not enough to go around, there's not enough this and that. That's actually just shows how inefficient the system actually is. Land mass is perfectly abundant. I've already seen stats on how you could easily redistribute the current population, have an immense amount of land left over. The technological revolution could easily provide an abundance if you removed all the inefficiencies. This is one of the great revolutions of thought that Buckminster Fuller and Jacques Fresco pointed out. That it was roughly 20, 30 years ago we hit that point where you can see the exponential increase in science and technology and how much more efficient and the level of abundance that can be created. It's pretty easy to statistically quantify, especially when reduce and remove all the inefficiencies of the current system. So I don't believe in overpopulation. I don't see any real stats to support it. It's more of a propaganda tool to promote the farce social Darwinism we see. And unfortunately, and you mentioned a little bit about the elite, unfortunately it's also a kind of a pop culture issue now too. And I don't buy into that either. I don't think there's any, if there's going to be a plan to depopulate, it's going to come from the natural state of the system. It's not going to be anyone planning to do it. It's just going to be a natural consequence, just like it's a natural consequence in Africa where you have millions dying of HIV, when in fact the drugs are there. People can survive now, but there's no money there. And there's no more, they're too busy exploiting the resources of that region, the gold, everything else to care. They want that totally destabilized environment just like they do in the Congo and everywhere else that you see this stuff. So long tangents on how the system's used and wants and materializes abuse for resource acquisition, everything else, globalization, but I'll stop there.
Time for one more, I guess?
Yeah.
I understand that on a community level, it's important to come together to create community and do projects. Maybe that's time baking or permaculture or community currency. On an individual level, how do we pull out of the game? It seems like we're either in or we're out. Even if we're doing work that we love so much, that we're so called to do, and it doesn't feel like work. It's not work, but we're taking that monetary currency to survive. What's the transition? What does that look like?
I really believe that it's not going to happen from an individual action. It's going to have to be a collective. It starts with the individual, but think about it. I know plenty of people that run around and they have self-sustaining communities in different regions. I have friends in North Carolina that do this, and they just want to hide, basically. And then unfortunately, you can't hide from this. The economic system as it exists in its financial state is far too symbiotic already, and the natural consequences as far as the environment are equally as symbiotic as consequences, so there's really no escape. I would say that you walk the line, as we all do, where you submit to the system and whatever commercial element you have to, and then you dedicate another element of your life to this type of movement. And that's the best way I can think of it.
Yeah, it's basically what I would say.
Over here.
Yeah, I would say as you start to get more and more into a value system that supports what we're talking about, which a lot of you are already familiar with, you find that you start to make little choices over time that are different, and you could probably look back and say, you know, I used to do this, but I haven't done this in a while. You know, it could be, being more conservative with resources, being more eco-conscious in a sense of what you're utilizing, reusing things. That sense. It could be sharing amongst friends, doing free cycle. It could be, giving stuff away on Craigslist instead of just tossing it, just making sure it goes to somebody who needs it. Those little things, if everyone were to do a lot of little things and make those little transitions that have that underlying value set, I think it would actually have a big impact. We've already started to see that even on a small level with like people recognizing that, that banks are in their life in a way that they don't really want them. So how do we move off of that? How do we get out of that? Do we move to a credit union? What's the deal? Little changes of thought will create, I think, the paradigm shift we're looking for. It's nothing major. You can't unplug entirely, unfortunately. And even like Peter said, the people who try, then you have the danger, like I said before, of wanting to just have your little world, your corner of earth, and then people will eventually invade your resources out of need. So that's why you can't just go to that as the ultimate solution. But you're going to need to start taking provisions to have an awareness in your community of how could we be more sustainable if we need to be, and making those connections. Just those little things. Just turning off the television of programs that do not support. And I say this, and Jason works in the television industry, but
oh, come on, but I know how to webcast. So.
Or put better stuff out there, put informative things out there, things that support a different value set. In other words, stop engaging in the things that people are creating for, the mass media effect. And the more people we can get to be turned off by that stuff, the less of it I think we'll see, and then we'll start to see a gradual transition. But I think it's very small adjustments, if you can imagine, making those that will make the difference overall. Lots of people doing that. All coming through education.
Sure. Okay, go for it, please.
Hey, thanks so much for being here. This is awesome. So the question is pretty much Occupy specific. From the beginning it was, the energy was completely focused mostly on occupying spaces, attracting people to the movement and getting the issues out. Now that the whole eviction of our, right to peacefully assemble has come out, what is the best or the next step that you would feel, or what is the most pressing issue that we need to fix in order to actually make that better world? So where do you...
Well, that's a great question. There's all sorts of small awareness actions. Really what you guys are doing is an awareness campaign. It's not, you guys, you feel the problem, and you're trying to get other people to feel it too, and really draw attention to it and say, yes, we're serious about this. The ultimate tool of the establishment that is being used against you and everyone else is divide and conquer, which is what has been used since the beginning of everything. You can go back and read Nazi documents that were written in full statistical treatment on how to divide up any type of opposition. Divide and conquer is a very old notion. And the greatest problem with any large movement is that either the division happens internally with people that don't get along, they don't have a clear understanding of what their problem is, the problem and hence the solution. As Jen pointed out, you really want to alienate people, you start talking about solutions, because most people just like to complain. And they're just not ready. They're not ready to really focus on anything and think that way, unfortunately. So the greatest thing that needs to happen in the broad view is the unification, and continuing that in the tightest way you possibly can. And somehow a larger organization needs to merge. In the Zeitgeist Movement, we have chapters. Crudely, we have about 1,000 chapters stretched across 70 countries. And we have meetings, there's chapter meetings, and it's in a kind of a reverse hierarchy where we have a level of data flow. You can go to the site movement and read about all that stuff. And while we're still small in number and holistically compared to world population, it's quite amazing to see how tight we really have become, especially when everyone's kind of sharing the same solution, which is amazing. It's one thing just to have people complaining again, but I'm continually impressed by what's happening, even though it's small. And to me, that's the ultimate seed. And then you do one of two things. You create solution-oriented projects, and then you create disturbance projects that are legal and nonviolent that will disturb the system just enough to draw even more attention to it and maybe even force recognition to the root problem that you're addressing. As I mentioned earlier, you can engage unions, you can engage people. It's one thing for a union to say protest with you guys, it's another for them to engage in a concerted effort to stop what they're doing for, say, one day. Imagine what would happen if 50%, here's the example I use, which I don't advocate because it's kind of meaningless, but if, say, if 50% of the United States population decided not to pay their income taxes, do you honestly think the U.S. government can go after and prosecute every one of them? The power is in numbers, and that's the ultimate chess game here. And that's why the movement does what it does, and why I can't talk about that enough, and that's why all of our strategies are around creating a global human mass appeal. And the moment you have that, the moment you show that, it becomes self-protective. So you assume you have an Occupy movement over here in one country and they get really oppressed. You make sure the network is strong enough where people come to your aid in a public awareness campaign. There's a massive new world of media and blog that can really stir things up. And now things that hit Facebook and things like this, they actually get to the news now because it moves so fast. So you create a self-protecting network that's global, as large as possible, which is, again, what we're trying to do too. It's really the same goal if you think about it. We just really have a pretty discrete solution we're trying to put forward. I mean, at the end of the day, and I hate to ramble on this, I really believe the Occupy is just on the edge of what we've been talking about for a long time. This isn't about the movement. It's about just the train of thought. If you want a sustainable society that's balanced, that doesn't have conflict, there is an empirical, near empirical train of thought that can be established and understood. And once people are permeated with that, there's no turning back. I mean, we've really messed ourselves up psychologically. I mean, I walk around, all I see is inefficiency everywhere. All I see is absurdity and obnoxious. I'm completely ruined. But that's part of the process. So do whatever you can to keep the strength of it going and create programs and projects that are always in concert globally. That's why we have global projects too. So, sure.
I was going to say, one of the things that we really are up against is that there are a lot of traditional stories out there that say that something like this is not in the cards from one way or another. From a nationalistic perspective, there are stories, you know, our people versus their people, us versus them. Religions, there are stories. Our God, you know, would want it this way, da-da-da-da-da. The key is to try to find where we have common ground that we can all agree on, and that's where there isn't a story, but a technical reality that we can access. And I'm not saying stories are bad, but I'm saying any opportunity you have to expand someone's story to allow this reality is going to help immensely, because we really need to move out of the mindset. The only thing keeping us from moving into a sustainable direction is people thinking we can't. So the more that you can help wherever you are, even as an individual, to just even interject, not in a combative way or debating way, but even just to ask a question that allows somebody to think, well, you know, could it be that there's, could we do this technically? And if we could, how would you feel about that? Is that wrong to do it? if we could, and things like that, and just engage people in that sense, and we can sort of break through, because really, if you look around, reality doesn't match so much of what the stories are about how life is supposed to be. Or even then if you played the game right, then you would have your nice little nest egg and retire. That's not working for people anymore. They need a new story. And yet some of them, even so, are sticking to the story because it's the only story they know. So I would just say, find the story and find a way to say, you know, I know you've mentioned that, but can you think of examples in real life where that is really applicable? Or do you think maybe there's something different going on? You just expand it a little bit, and I think if all of us are doing that, we will be engaging the world towards this paradigm shift that's necessary.
One more? Okay, cool.
How you guys doing? Thanks. I heard you say that you liked numbers, so I got a couple numbers for you. This is just something I happen to be playing with today. There was an article in the local paper back in September that one of the elementary schools had to have a car wash to raise money for toilet paper because the budgets have been cut back so many times year after year after year that they don't even have money to put the toilet paper in the elementary school, so they had to have a car wash for that. While on the other hand, by the end of the calendar year, the United States of America will have spent nearly $4 trillion on the war in Iraq. So I did a little math. I figured out the size of the planet Earth, which is 500 million square miles. You guys, Earth is your thing. It's huge, right? Yeah, that's right. You could with the money.
It's the beginning of the global survey. But it's everybody's thing.
I'm getting there. With the money that we spent on the war in Iraq, we could have covered the entire surface of the Earth 6.7 times. That's just a little analogy for you. No, but the reason that I'm saying those things to you, because the reason that I'm saying that is just to paint a little picture of what the reality is with regard to our universe, our world. You know, let's not kid ourselves. The industrial military, it's a well-oiled machine right now. And for, you know, there was a statement someone made earlier about, you know, the Occupy LA ending peacefully. Well, it didn't end peacefully for the people who weren't able to get off the property. Yeah. It ended really brutally. Sure. Some of the people were even, you know, actually terrorized to get to, you know, bring to break their circles. So I guess what I would just like to ask you, now if I can put a question to all that, those numbers, is for someone like me who's been around for a long time and seen a lot, I'm pretty overwhelmed by how bad the bad is versus, you know, how few and, you know, how small the good is at this point. So if you guys just want to comment on that, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure.
Well, I think because the system instills fear on people to not want to step out of the box, the people that were in the Occupy tent cities had a tremendous amount of courage to be there because they knew it was at stake. And most people, while they identify with those values, wouldn't put themselves on the line like that, wouldn't forego their occupations and all of that. It's just so difficult to be semi-self-preserving in those environments. So I think the numbers actually are there. It's just not coming to fruition. And I will point out, as I did earlier, you know, you talk about the abuse. There's so many more of us than there are of any of them. That all it takes is some type of extremely concerted type of work to show what the power could be on a global scale. And that's what I continue to advocate. I think that's really where it has to be. I don't see this coming from small groups anymore. Either it goes global and it goes with mass, critical mass, and it does actions that simply can't be stopped. Not bad actions, not illegal actions. All it takes is people just not to participate. That's all it takes. It's actually really easy to see how fast the military-industrial complex are still run by people. You know, there needs to be a campaign that really works to show what the military-industrial complex is. I was originally going to do a documentary just on that issue, but I'm doing something different right now. You know, you could have in huge, the banonwar.com. You know, you can be amazed that if you think about it, you could begin to create a subculture that moves against so many pivotal establishment ideas that eventually will be brought together into one. You know, I could ramble on a lot about those issues, but each one of them can be pinpointed, targeted, and then assessed, public awareness brought around it as far as the detriment of it, and then you begin to unify all of them and show its systemic source, because it all comes back down to economics. War is an economic extension. The police and the Occupy are defending the economic institution. So,
well, you mentioned sort of the military-industrial complex. I think of weapons of mass destruction, and I think we need some weapons of mass creation on the flip side. What else was I going to say? It's one of the things as an individual and an activist, it's easy to get bogged down with the negative. I would just say try to temper what's going in of negative. We get really excited about the blame game and, oh, look at this, and passing it along. I do too. Oh my gosh, can you believe this? Be conscious that you're part of that, and try to balance it out with something that is, look at what we can do with technology. What if we did this? Try to balance out your language and communication, and if you could even eclipse it a little bit of the, with positive, with just what is possible, then I think you will feel better, and people around you will feel better, and that it can be possible then. Because really, like I said, what's keeping us from this is people thinking it's not possible, and the more and more we circulate all the negative, and even this, there are things that are appalling and jaw-dropping, and there's some sort of factor in that. It's why that's all you see on the news. It's so easy to get really, really depressed about things. Make a concerted effort to notice what you're putting out, what you're sharing. It's fine to talk about the problems. Try to point somebody in a possible, solution, a different way of thinking. And if you even that out a little bit, I think it'll be a little bit easier to get by. And I think that's where our strength's going to need to come from anyway, is helping to build ourselves up by what is possible.
All right. Thanks. Kim, did you have anything you wanted to close out with? Or I don't know how we are in time. Do you have time for that?
It's up to Grant from the studio. Do we have, yeah? Yeah?
Okay,
Are
go
you
ahead.
guys?
At the mic so we can hear your question on the...
Thank you for being here this evening.
Sure.
I'm involved with the Sangha of Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but through his Sangha, we're getting involved with setting up sustainable communities that are largely independent from society at large. And I know you did touch on that and how that really isn't sustainable for the long term. But have you guys, or the Zeitgeist Movement, thought about implementing this parallel system that you have discussed by creating some sort of sustainable communities?
Do you want to touch on that? Or? Okay.
I'll just say real fast, quick fast answer is no. Because again, in the long run, there are plenty of people doing that, and I think that's great. It's not something that I think is a protocol for the movement. It was just far too important, the educational stuff that we do. And eventually other actions, for example, time banks could be utilized, rather than the kind of semi-escapist and sustainability kind of thing where it's a lo-fi type of environment, which I completely respect and understand. What if you had other programs to enable transitions, such as time banks, where you have people beginning to barter labor and removing the circulation of money? That's a great way to stifle the system and also give people a chance to get their services met. And this is rampant in New York, not rampant, but it's popular in New York and some other regions. Of course, the U.S. tax law is a little spooky there, but they seem to be getting away with it for now. But those are more important to us. If we're going to do any type of action that is going to help people in that sense, it should be equally working to remove the system. So there's the kind of the chess game that I like to work with. There's a few other angles you could talk about with that too, but time banks are the best that I've come up with, because you're removing the circulation, you know what I mean? You're bringing down GDP, and the more people that choose to do that, I hate to say it, but the faster the problems of the system become exposed, because they're exposed already, but if you remove GDP, they'll drop down faster. And I hate to say it, but there is going to be a collapse type of catalyst here that will push people forward, and at that stage, having sustainable communities might be at a disadvantage in a certain sense, because of the things that Jen pointed out regarding people and how they'll behave in positions of scarcity.
I just want to add, one way to look at it is that the Zeitgeist Movement doesn't take a position on it as something we say, go do this, because what happens is that that's where everybody puts their focus, and there's no focus for the end goal, or what we're really going for. So what we say is, if you have an inclination to be a part of a community that is getting off grid, say, or growing your own food or those kinds of things, go do it. That's great. You'll meet a lot of people who are Zeitgeist friendly and want to be a part of that, and we send people your way, and we'll be doing our own thing to get involved in sustainable systems as things collapse as individuals. But as a movement, we're still going to be talking about these ideas at the forefront, because otherwise we haven't solved the problem globally. So I just view it as something that needs to happen at the same time as the education that we're doing. It's something that's going to happen anyway. As people find that's the only thing you have left, you're going to have to create a community. You're going to have to rely on your community. So that, to me, is a little bit more inevitable. If you have ways to educate people on how they can do that better, that's great. Stuff like that gets circulated among individuals in our movement all the time. But as far as what we consider activism towards a solution, that's when we're talking about getting out of the monetary system, building a global system. That's when you'll hear us. Not so much go to that, because it's easy to get stuck in that, and it's not, the end-all solution that we're looking for as far as where we're headed. So that's why I would say, don't think that we don't support that. It's that we support it for do what you have to do, transition, that's great. But we would hope that where you are, that you would also be doing both, I guess. That everybody's doing both.
I would also add that anything that's more efficient is anathema to this system. So if you do have the resources to be off the grid or to install renewable energies like solar panels, if you have the financial resources ultimately to do that, that's a great thing to do, because the more efficient we become, the more less reliant we are on the infrastructure of this system, the faster this system fails, because it has to have constant consumption. And again, the technological element is leaving the market system behind, and that's the ultimate clash that I keep speaking of. But I agree with you. If you do what you need to do, but keep the larger view.
Now, concerning the parallel system, how is it implemented then?
Well, that's a huge question. How do you implement a complete revolution of a social system? It's not going to be some easy thing. Obviously, it's really a battle of religions in a certain sense. I hate to say it that way, but that's how vehement people hold on to. Vehement their behavior can be as they hold on to their identities. People identify with this system. They see themselves in it. They think their acquisition of money defines their success, and it's a religion. So how do you do that in a very solid, peaceful way? Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a step-by-step process where you could have a step-by-step socialization, if you will. You apply the technology, you remove human labor, make things cheaper, you bring more people to work, divide the labor day up, and you just slowly make a tipping point. That's probably not going to happen that way. It's probably going to happen with a big bottoming out of society, with a lot of subcultures that emerge that go off the grid to try and protect themselves, and eventually, somehow it's going to kind of congeal itself back with a new scientific state of revolutionary rationality that's going to have to emerge, which is a technical revolution, and then someone will come forward, hopefully with, as I mentioned, the Global Design Institute, or some other organization, the Venus Project, Buckminster Fuller. These guys have been thinking about this for a long time. Are their solutions empirical? No, but the train of thought's there. And that's the most important thing. So any engineers out there, think about it. How would you redesign? Walk down the street. How would you redesign all of Los Angeles? Why? Don't you think it's kind of silly that we have all these stoplights that are completely uncoordinated and you're just sitting there burning gas? You know how much gas is burned sitting at these red lights? That's just atrociously, but most people don't even think about that. Think about all the people that get killed by cars why don't we just build little pedestrian walkways that go over the front of the top of these things? That seems logical, doesn't it? Or maybe underneath, as they could do in New York. Or, there's all sorts of things that your mind will run with as you get more creative when you see how inefficient things are. And hopefully that type of design revolution will emerge. So what I hope to implement, this final point again, to plug this, is this Global Redesign Institute, go nonprofit, which is literally a huge team globally that's working and sharing the group mind technically to figure out how to redesign society from the ground up, region by region, block by block. And then eventually you have conferences and you bring whomever to a conference and say, boom, Here's the whole west side of Los Angeles, completely technically redesigned. No money, they're not thinking about money, just think about what's possible. Think about what's technically viable, mathematically possible with the resources and state of knowledge we have now, with the ultimate protocol of efficiency and abundance and self-sustaining elements and all those things as the rule, which is what defines an economy. So if you can get people to do that, then you'd be ahead of the game. Unfortunately, I don't know of one institution that really does that. Even those institutions that have solutions that are floating, none of them have applied them to anything I've ever seen. So to me, that's I think, is the next step, the actual application to show the world what's possible. And then from there, people will ask the question, why aren't we doing this? And there you have your transition. Yeah. Slowly.
The actual system, the global system, would first consist of taking an inventory of all the resources on planet Earth and then going from there to decide like how things would need to be designed. So that's why even if you designed it in small communities, it would undergo a complete redesign because it would need to factor in all that's global. And without money as a limitation, that's another factor too that goes beyond what is possible in the actual design.
Well, see, this is kind of what I was thinking in that regard, is that if you have a prototype where people can actually see it,
right,
then it may raise awareness to an even higher level, because all of this, as you were saying, is about raising awareness. That's right, really the bottom line.
People don't see outside of what they've been conditioned to see. People only know what they've been brought into. And you'd be amazed how many people, when they hear this stuff, the light bulbs that fly off, because they never even pondered such a thing. They don't even pondered what a world without money might be, or even considered what, having free resources and how that would work. It's a religious indoctrination, and it blocks their creativity. And that's the biggest barrier, ultimately. It's the value barrier. So I agree with you. That's why I think that's a good idea to have the design type of quality. Even if it's just on gesture, though. It doesn't have to be 100% firm as far as relationship to the empirical assessment. Absolutely, always, because the carrying capacity of the Earth is directly related to the advancement of technology. It's not just the physical gold and food and everything else. It's always an evolution. So all those factors taken into account, if you get the public to understand. It's not complicated either. It's not complicated to realize you just, manage your household. Imagine that. Imagine actually taking account of things. It seems like we might do that, but we're not. We're not doing that at all. Anyway. Is that it? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank
you. So we just want to thank Peter, Jason, Jen, and 13 Main Studio. This is Grant, one of the owners of the studio. He just wants to make a very quick announcement. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you. Thank you. This is no mistake that you're here tonight. I also started earthprotect.com, which is 4 years ago. I started this environmental website with the idea from image to action.
Okay.
I'd love your help. You have an environmental story, you have an environmental video, you want something to change. This is a place to put it. We help get the story out. That's it. We don't gain anything. I completely pay for everything that happens on the site. This studio helps to pay for it. You being here tonight is supporting that. And thanks for coming.
Great.
And I'm taking pictures as part of an art project. If you're interested, I'm right there.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
And that's it. Thanks for coming, everyone. We're going to shut down the webcast, and video will be available for anyone who wasn't able to make it tonight. I'll get it to the appropriate party, so you can repost it and let other people see it. So, cool.
One more quick announcement from Occupy Venice. We have our General Assembly tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, behind Ananda. You can go to occupyvenice.org to find out more details. We'd love to see you there.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to 1320 Main Studios. This is brought to you by Occupy Venice, and this is the first of a series that we're doing called Venice talk. And tonight we're going to have filmmaker Peter Joseph here. We're very excited. Yeah. He has made 3 award-winning documentaries, and most of us have seen them. I want to thank, just a couple thank yous before we start, to Jason Lord and Jen Wilding, who are the coordinators of the Zeitgeist Movement, to 1320 Main Street for hosting us tonight, so thank you. We are live stream here in Venice, California, to Alex Mahone for running the camera. And of course to Occupy Venice and everybody that came tonight to hear the talk. And shout out to all the other Occupies around the world. So I'm going to bring up Jason Lord, Peter Joseph, Jen Wilding. You can come up? All right, great.
Okay. We got the comfy chair coming forward. Will that work? That'll work. Yes, sir. Yeah, I think. Stand to, or you want me? I'll bring the mic over. All right, we're sitting. Come over this way. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Lord. I got involved with the Zeitgeist Movement a couple of years ago, basically from seeing the movies, and I was inspired so much by the work of the film and what it talked about, what it advocates as far as a sustainable direction. I volunteered to help coordinate a California chapter, which is now 18 cities in California have similar chapters, which are groups designed similar to what yours is for Occupy Venice. So I was sort of the point person that brought in the website and bring everyone together. So anyway, we have a global movement. It's about 2 years of age. We've gone through a lot of similar growing pains. I actually sympathize and empathize with Occupy Venice for a lot of the struggles you guys have getting organized and getting off the ground. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's mainly just set up for the evening. I think, did you have something you wanted to say first? Or, I'm just curious, how many people have seen any of the Zeitgeist documentaries, any of the 3 films? That's everybody, okay. We did a screening for Occupy Venice last month, I think, of Addendum. There's another film waiting in the wings after that, which is a little longer and a little more into details about the solution aspect, which is called Moving Forward. So you can see all these films online if you haven't seen them already, zeitgeistmovie.com. But we'll hopefully get to do, you guys have Sunday evening documentary screenings. We'll fit Moving Forward into the rotation at some point. So anyway, thanks. I hope you have questions. If you've seen the films and you're wondering about how this resource-based economic model could ever come into being, how we deal with the political system, how we deal with power structures, how do you deal with capitalism, with the corporate concentration of wealth and the
book, and it's really amazing. So we're at this critical point of reorganizing, and just in your opinion, what do you suggest would be next? You guys have years of experience.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. What's next for Occupy? I guess until someone starts to advocate a new system or some very legitimate and long-lasting and scrutinizable number of changes that will help some type of resolution occur with all of the problems that are listed and the grievances of Occupy across the world, I'm not quite sure what the next step is. Because if you look at what's happened with Occupy, it's been flattened out as far as the symbol of it, which is the tents and everything else that have occurred. And New York, we all knew wasn't going to last very long. They were working on that one. And LA was very cordially flattened out. And of course, now Occupy more or less exists in this state of mind, if you will. It's, there's not really an occupation, as it were. And that's equally as viable to me. The question is, what do you do? And I think if there's anything that we walk away with here, it's what is the solution? Because if you propose a solution that can be analyzed and logically deduced and then hence understood, and then therefore that train of thought can hopefully overcome the filters that people have that try to maintain this system because they identify with it, slowly that begins to permeate, and then Occupy becomes something different. And hopefully it'll be more of a transformation of the Occupy movement into something that actually proposes solutions. And that's why the Zeitgeist Movement is what it is. I mean, a lot of people like to compare the two movements. The Zeitgeist Movement's defining feature isn't as much of a complaint or as an activist group. It is the fact that we push forward with a very straightforward train of thought about what it means to live on the planet. And if you've seen Zeitgeist Addendum or Zeitgeist Moving Forward, there's a great linear treatment on a lot of those issues. If anyone has other questions regarding that, I'm happy to address that, but that's a long-winded subject I'm not going to jump into right now as far as what defines that. So to answer the question, there has to be some type of project, as far as I'm concerned, a global project basically for redesign that takes all of the frustrations, puts them into utility, and brings people that have the fortitude and education and skill set to basically, in my opinion, push forward with a completely new social system. And that's another huge conversation. I made a little blog thing where I said a parallel government should be created. What I meant by that isn't that you get a bunch of people sitting around and say how they're going to control people like government is today and making laws and all of that stuff. It has to do with what is a legitimate basis, a sustainable basis for society that respects the planet, respects the habitat, and also has the most optimized treatment of public health possible. And that's a completely technical orientation. It doesn't take Republicans or Democrats or liberals to think that way. It's a completely scientific train of thought. So the parallel government, if you will, is really a group of people that are willing to or already have education on the issues that really relate to the foundational operation of society. And what is that? That's resource management. That's what is labor? What defines labor? Is labor really people, selling gum at an airport because they need a paycheck? Is that really the appropriate use of the human mind, which has an immense infinite capacity? We dumb people down. Again, I'm not going to go through the tangent of it, but what defines the most progressive
corruption that goes on in the world? Have these questions on your mind, fire them at us, and we'll answer them as best we can. There's a very simple logic to being in balance with the environment and seeing the impact of the environment on human behavior. And when we start looking at the problems that we see is just the way it is all the time, pollution increases, corruption in politics. I mean, there's a long list of statistics that we all identify with as problems. We start to see that these things are produced by the system the way it's designed. The monetary, economic, socioeconomic system, the way we have it set up, the way we live in it, produces the corruption that you see. It's actually systemic. So if we ever want to have a world where this stuff doesn't exist, or at least the probabilities drop, we're going to have to evolve out of the socioeconomic system that we're in. And there's a bit of a process to that. First, it starts with understanding and changing your point of view on what the problems are, the root cause, what's causing these outcomes. And then, once you see that, we can move forward to a very simple train of thought on how we could actually organize society and have everyone thrive, have health care, have the mundane jobs disintegrated, just drop away, apply science, apply automation, create an access abundance for the world's people. And this model that we talk about is global. It includes everybody. There's no stratification. There's no person left behind. So anyway, so just set that up in your minds and think of some questions for us, and we'll, thanks for being here. So Kim, did you want to fire away first? Okay, I think this mic is off right now. So I want to bring this over here.
We can center ourselves.
If you guys could pull in, and more towards the middle, that would be great. So just to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to for you guys. I mean, you guys have been around a lot, the Occupy movement, but so in support of Occupy Wall Street and the social issues it addresses, in the past 2 months, Occupy Venice has we've had an art event, we hosted movie screenings, we screened Addendum, we've had a music event, a poetry event. Some of us have helped set up the stages downtown and the performances at Occupy LA. We've participated and organized a march. A large group of Occupy Venice participants were at the raid of City Hall. I'm sure a lot of people here were there. And many of us are showing up at city council meetings and other political events. Most of us have seen your films. Some of us have followed the Zeitgeist Movement. And a lot of us were there for your speech at Occupy LA after the march through the financial district. And we all took in that speech. It was great, so thank you. I'm going to get to my question. So my question is, now that most of the tent occupations are down and people have reorganized, like Occupy Venice, in your opinion, what would be the next best step for Occupy Venice and the other, Occupy movements? How do we most effectively move forward now that we have a local and global group of supporters and there's this huge wave of momentum? Everybody's communicating around the world via Facebook.
A list to start off with? Because we're webcasting tonight, we'll ask you to come up to the microphone. Otherwise, the people watching the video online can't hear you. So we'd like to get your questions recorded. So if you want to ask a question, just come up to this microphone right here and fire away.
First of all, thank you. You talk about our economic game of differential advantage. How have you personally changed this in your life?
As far as how I don't participate in differential advantage, personally?
How you personally?
Well, the first thing to point out is that differential advantage isn't something that you really choose in this system. You either work the game that's been set up and survive fiscally, meaning you have a job and you pursue it, and you are basically in competition to the organization you work with, the corporation, or you're in competition with other laborers that want your job. Differential advantage takes many different forms, and I always want to point that out. In order for any of us to survive, we all have to engage in that type of semi-corrupt social behavior. That's just the kind of social Darwinism that's been set up. That's just the way it is. I mean, for example, but to answer your question, I would say that one thing I've done is I've not made my films scarce. So my films are available for free and downloadable for free. So I do have a semi-commercial aspect to being a filmmaker. I have to generate income to make more films. That's just the way the system is. But I also don't take a full-on commercial route, and I give it away for free, which is a very difficult line to walk if I want to support myself. That's about the closest thing I could think of. I mean, I certainly don't behave, and I think many of us don't behave in ways we would consider to be overtly greedy, as it were. But it's all an issue of degree when you look at, say, the, quote, 1%. Who are these people? These are the best game players, the best people that strategize with differential advantage. They know what they're doing, and they think it's good. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they think it's good to have billions and billions of dollars while a billion people are starving? Why wouldn't they think that? Because that's everything the system has ever taught them as far as what defines their value and self-worth and status and success.
But basically, I mean, you're talking about radical mind changing, right? I mean, you're really about kind of dewiring the way that we're all participating in that game. So I guess, to further that question, how do you...
You remove the game. You remove the game itself. If you realize we're causal organisms, and as controversial as that is, people don't like to think of themselves as being that influenced by others. They don't like to assume. They like to think there's this heavy free will thing and that they're making their own decisions, but we're really not making our own decisions per se. We have a small threshold of free will, as it's called. Every word I'm saying has been taught to me, all the values that we all share historically, traditionally. Our political affiliations are all groomed and we're shaped and molded through our lives. So the financial system as it exists, because I used to be a trader. I used to be of the greediest mentality. I wanted to escape from this system. It wasn't that bad, but I wanted to get away, and the only thing I could think of was that. And my focus for many years was how to gain the most differential advantage in every situation I could get, because that's what I was taught. And that was what the environment required from me. I didn't have a moral aptitude for that. All that was a relevant state of affairs based on knowledge we have today, and the scientific revolution that we've had since 3,000 years ago. We've had maybe it's the beginning of the real scientific revolution. It's gone ebbed and flowed to the Middle Ages. And suddenly now society is beginning to realize it has to be scientific. It can't be political anymore. It can't be superstitious anymore. Our survival is in balance based on how rational we apply the knowledge that we've accumulated through our evolution. And there's the real danger. And if we don't do something, all the destabilization that you have now is just going to get worse. And there's plenty of statistics to denote that every element of life support is in decline. All the destabilization, which is unprecedented on a global scale, can only get worse if you look at where the debt crisis is, the unemployment crisis, and all the things that are weeding themselves out naturally because of the state of evolution of technology and everything else. I'm planting seeds here, by the way, for other questions. So I'm trying to work on some kind of way to explain how a new institution, a global institution, can come together. I had an idea. It was called the Global Redesign Institute. And of course, this builds upon other researchers. And I strongly suggest everyone research Buckminster Fuller and Jacques Fresco and many other thinkers that have thought about what a new societal design may be and really latch onto that train of thought. There is no utopian vision, though. There's nothing that you can just say, here it is, and that's it. There's no structural implementation. Technology moves too fast. So anyone that shows you something that says, this is it, they're wrong. It can't be, because by the time that even comes to fruition, considering where we are now, it's going to be long outdated, because the technological revolution that defines our values will continue regardless. So the Global Redesign Institute is something I put forward. It doesn't have to be that, but it's about how do you get people together to redesign society, legitimately create a real economy. What's a real economy? It's the proper management of the Earth's resources and the proper management of public health. And you put those two elements together and you get a self-referring type of logic that comes from the ground up that basically dictates what our values should be if we expect to live in harmony and balance and not have wars and disease and famines and all the destabilizing elements we have now. So to summarize that, some type of organization needs to emerge. I think Occupy is a great stemming point for this, just like many other movements out there like ours. And it has to come together where people say, you know what, we're not going to play the political game anymore. We're going to show the world what a real design of a society may be. And then if people see the merit of it, then the public slowly is educated, and then eventually a new counter-revolution emerges that's not violent, it's not protest. It will basically shift where it stops supporting the existing system and begins to support this other sustainable system. And the whole thing just falls over. As poetic as that sounds, it's not. I can't put that in any other phrase because I have no idea how it really would happen.
Yeah.
But that's the way I think this type of thing will work. I've given up on political things. I don't think the political lobbying, and I think there are plenty of intelligent people that could be turned around in the political institution, but the game is faulty. The political game is not about actual proper social management in the way that it really needs to be to define an economy. Of course, it's a gangland thing. It's a mafia thing. It's an echo of tribal mentalities. And that's unfortunately where the planet is at large with sovereignty and everything else. So I think I've planted many seeds there. And if anybody else wants to say something about that, we can move on. What? There we go.
Oh, I'm fine to respond as the questions.
Oh, okay, fine. Kim, I believe you had